The note was a single sheet of cheap-lined paper, torn from a spiral notebook. It had been slipped under the heavy oak door of his penthouse suite, a stark, flimsy intruder in a world of polished marble and silent, formidable security. Jae-hwan Kwan stared down at it, his shadow falling long and sharp across the floor. His second-in-command, Min Jun, had found it and presented it to him with the same grave deference he would a death threat from a rival family. Perhaps this was worse. He took the paper. It was light, impossibly so, yet it felt heavier than the custom-forged firearm tucked against the small of his back. Her handwriting was on it, a neat, slightly hurried script he'd only ever seen on the intake forms and medical charts she was always so diligent about. He had once teased her that her penmanship was too perfect for a person who claimed to be so messy. She had laughed, a sound that had felt like the first day of spring after a decade-long winter. He unfolded the paper. 4 words. "I can't do this." And below them, 2 more, a final gutting apology. "I'm sorry." Jae-hwan Kwan, the man who ran the city's shadows, the heir to a criminal empire that stretched from Seoul to this very skyscraper, read the note and went still. The air in his lungs seemed to crystallize, shattering into a million tiny, painful shards. The world, which had only just begun to feel vibrant and full of color, snapped back to its familiar shades of gray and black. The paper trembled, a fragile leaf caught in the invisible storm that had just broken inside him. He did not make a sound. He simply stood there, a king in his castle, holding the ghost of a promise, utterly and completely broken. It had all started 3 months ago, under the merciless fluorescent lights of St. Jude's General Hospital. Alara Vance felt the familiar ache settling deep into the bones of her feet, a dull throb that radiated up her calves and settled in her lower back. It was the official anthem of a double shift, 16 hours of beeping machines, demanding patience, and the sterile, cloying scent of antiseptic that clung to her scrubs like a second skin. She was exhausted down to a cellular level, a walking monument to caffeine and sheer, stubborn will. "You're a machine, Ilara," her friend and fellow nurse Chloe had said, handing her a fresh chart. A beautiful, underpaid, sleep-deprived machine. Ilara had just managed a weak smile. The underpaid part was the real kicker. She juggled her full-time nursing job with per diem shifts at a clinic across town, all in a desperate, frantic race against the mountain of debt her degree had left her with and the ever-increasing rent on the tiny apartment she and Chloe shared. Her dream, a small free clinic in the neighborhood she'd grown up in, felt less like a distant star and more like a cruel joke whispered in a dead language. Just one more," she'd murmured to herself, glancing at the new assignment. "Room 1201, VIP suite." Chloe had rolled her eyes. "Good luck. He's a real ray of sunshine. Came in last night with a GSW to the shoulder. His people are calling it a security consultation gone wrong." "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." Ilara sighed. VIPs were the worst. They expected hotel service, not medical care, and their sense of entitlement was usually more toxic than whatever ailment had landed them there. A gunshot wound, though. That added a layer of something else. Something dangerous. She pushed open the door to room 1201, and the sterile hospital smell was immediately overpowered by something else. The faint, expensive scent of cologne, leather, and money. The suite was enormous, more like a luxury hotel room than a hospital ward. A man who could only be one of his people, impeccably dressed, built like a refrigerator with a face carved from stone, stood near the door. He gave her a curt, dismissive nod. And then she saw the patient. He was sitting up in the bed, his left arm in a sling, a tablet resting on his lap. He hadn't noticed her yet. The stark white of the hospital gown contrasted sharply with his flawless, olive-toned skin. His hair was thick and black as ink, falling slightly over his forehead. Even sitting, it was clear he was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of the gown. He was, she noted with a detached, clinical part of her brain, devastatingly handsome. The kind of handsome that was a weapon. His face was all sharp angles and severe lines, a strong jaw, a straight nose, high cheekbones. A thin, silvery scar cut through his right eyebrow, a tiny imperfection that only made the rest of his face seem more arresting. He looked up then, his eyes locking onto hers. They were dark, almost black, and held an unnerving intensity. They were the eyes of a man used to being in charge, a man who assessed, calculated, and owned everything he saw. For a split second, Ilara felt a jolt, a strange, unwelcome flutter in her chest. She promptly squashed it. He was just another patient. A rich, probably criminal, and definitely difficult patient. Jae-hwan had been seething for 24 hours. He hated hospitals. He hated the weakness they represented, the lack of control. The bullet in his shoulder was a minor inconvenience, the result of a rival's sloppy and predictable ambition. It was the forced inactivity that was grating on him. Min-jun stood guard, a silent and loyal monolith, while Jae tried to manage his empire from a ridiculously plush hospital bed, the indignity of it all a constant irritant. He had barked at the last nurse, a timid young man who had fumbled with his IV line. He had ignored the bland, tasteless food. He was a caged tiger, and his patience, a notoriously finite resource, had worn to a thread. Then the door opened, and she walked in. The world didn't so much stop as it did clarify. Everything else faded into a dull, muted background. The incessant beeping of the monitor, the low hum of the air conditioning, the throbbing pain in his shoulder. It all vanished. There was only her. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, not in the way of the women who moved through his world, women who were polished, sculpted, and hollow. This woman was real. She was tall and graceful, with skin the color of rich coffee and a cloud of dark curls tied loosely at the nape of her neck. But it was her eyes that held him. They were a warm, deep brown, intelligent and direct, and tired. He could see the exhaustion etched into the fine lines around them in the slight slump of her shoulders. Yet there was an undeniable strength there, a resilience that shone brighter than her fatigue. She wasn't intimidated by Min-jun. She wasn't awed by the opulent suite. She met his intense gaze with a look of professional appraisal, her expression giving away nothing but a hint of weary competence. In that single frozen moment, Jae-hwan Kwon, a man who had never wanted for anything and had certainly never believed in such foolishness, felt a profound and inexplicable sense of connection. It was as if a part of his soul he hadn't known was missing had just walked into the room wearing blue scrubs and comfortable-looking sneakers. Ilara crossed the room, her movements efficient and sure. "Good evening, Mr. An," she said, reading the alias on his chart. Her voice was smooth, with a low, calming timbre that belied her tired appearance. "I'm Ilara, your nurse for the evening. I just need to check your vitals and change the dressing on your shoulder." Jae found his voice, surprised at the slight rasp in it. "Kwon," he said. It was an impulse, a stupid one. He never used his real name in situations like this. Min-jun shifted his weight by the door, a silent question in the movement. Jae ignored him. He wanted her to know his name. She paused, her fingers hovering over the blood pressure cuff. "I'm sorry? My name? It's Kwon. Jae-hwan Kwon." Ilara blinked, a flicker of surprise in her warm eyes before her professional mask slipped back into place. "All right, Mr. Kwon. If you could just relax your arm for me." She was all business. Her touch was gentle but firm as she wrapped the cuff around his bicep. He could smell the faint, clean scent of soap on her skin, a stark contrast to the heavy perfumes he was used to. He watched the focused line of her brow, the way her lips pursed slightly in concentration. He was utterly captivated. "Your blood pressure is a little high," she noted, scribbling on her chart. "You have no idea," he thought. As she moved to his injured side, he steeled himself. She carefully peeled back the bandage, her fingers brushing against his skin. His entire body tensed at the contact. It wasn't pain. It was something else entirely, a jolt of electricity that shot straight from his shoulder to his core. "Looks clean," she murmured, her voice close. "No signs of infection. That's good." She worked with a practiced efficiency that he, a man who valued competence above all else, found deeply admirable. She was focused, skilled, and completely unfazed by him. It was intoxicating. Most people in his presence were one of two things: terrified or sycophantic. She was neither. She was simply a nurse doing her job. "Is it always this exciting in the security consulting business?" she asked, her tone dry as she applied a fresh dressing. The question was casual, but there was a sharp edge to it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was the first time he had felt the inclination to smile in days. "Sometimes it's paperwork." "I'll bet." She finished her work and disposed of the old dressing with a snap of her gloves into the bin. "All right, Mr. Kwan, you're all set. Is there anything else I can get for you? More water? A pillow that doesn't feel like a brick? Your name. Your number. An hour of your time." The thoughts came, unbidden and startlingly intense. He, who could have anything he wanted with a single quiet command, found himself at a complete loss for words. "No," he managed to say. "Thank you." "Okay, I'll be back in a few hours to check on you." She gave him a small, professional nod and turned to leave. "Ilara," he said, the name feeling foreign and yet perfectly right on his tongue. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, and looked back at him. "Yes?" He searched for something to say, something clever or charming that would make her stay. Nothing came. "Thank you," he repeated, feeling like a fool. She gave him a strange look, a mixture of curiosity and wariness, before slipping out of the room, the door clicking softly shut behind her. The room felt instantly empty, the silence pressing in on him once more. But this time, it was different. It was a silence filled with the echo of her voice and the memory of her presence. Minjun finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Sir? You gave her your name?" "I know," Jay said, his gaze fixed on the door she had just walked through. He leaned his head back against the pillows, the pain in his shoulder a distant, meaningless hum. A slow, unfamiliar smile spread across his face. It was a hunter's smile, the smile of a man who had just found something he didn't know he was looking for, something he now knew he would stop at nothing to possess. The pursuit began the next day. Jae Hwan used his enforced convalescence as a strategic campaign. He learned her schedule, ensuring he was awake and lucid every time she was on shift. He became the model patient, a complete reversal of his initial behavior. He was polite. He was cooperative. He asked for nothing except, in his own subtle way, for her time. He'd ask her questions, feigning curiosity about the medical equipment in the room. "What does that number mean?" he'd ask, pointing to the monitor. Ilara, ever the professional, would explain. She kept her answers concise, her tone clinical. She was building a wall, brick by professional brick, and he could see it plainly. It didn't deter him. It fascinated him. "You're very good at your job," he said one afternoon as she was checking his IV drip. "It's what they pay me for," she replied without looking up. "They don't pay you enough." That made her pause. She finally looked at him, her brown eyes narrowed in suspicion. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means a job well done should be rewarded accordingly." His voice was smooth, a low purr. He was testing the waters, seeing how she'd react to the first hint of his wealth. Her reaction was not what he expected. There was no glimmer of interest, no avarice, only a flash of irritation. "My reward is a steady paycheck and the satisfaction of my patients not dying. I don't need anything else." She finished her task and made a note on her chart, her movements suddenly sharper, more abrupt. He was intrigued. Most people, when faced with his kind of money, became pliable. She became prickly. "My apologies," he said, and he was surprised to find he meant it. He had offended her. The thought was deeply unpleasant. "I didn't mean to imply—" "I know what you meant to imply," she cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Men like you think money fixes everything, that it buys everything. It doesn't." "Men like you." The phrase stung. She had him pegged, and she wasn't wrong. But with her, he didn't want to be a man like him. He wanted to be something else, someone else. From her perspective, Jae Hwan Kwan was a walking, talking red flag. He was handsome, yes, in a way that made her stomach do a nervous little flip, but he was also intense, possessive, and radiated a quiet danger that set all her internal alarms screaming. The way he watched her was unnerving. It wasn't the simple leering she was used to from some patients. It was deeper, more focused. It felt like he was looking into her soul and staking a claim. "The guy in 1201 is basically obsessed with you," Chloe commented one day in the break room, wiggling her eyebrows. "I saw the way he looked at you when you left his room, like a wolf spotting his dinner." "Don't be dramatic," Alara muttered, stirring her lukewarm coffee. "He's just a bored rich guy used to getting his way. Bored rich guys send flowers. This guy looks like he'd buy the flower shop and have it delivered to your doorstep." Chloe took a bite of her sandwich. "Just be careful, E. He's not our world." "I know," Ilara thought. That was the problem. His world was tailored suits and silent, imposing bodyguards. Her world was scrubs on sale and praying her car started in the morning. The gulf between them was too vast to even contemplate. And yet, there was something about him, a flicker of loneliness in his dark eyes, a surprising gentleness in the way he'd said her name. It was a dangerous combination. The day of his discharge arrived. Ilara felt a strange, unwelcome mix of relief and disappointment. She did her final checks, maintaining her professional distance. "So this is it," he said, already dressed in a ridiculously expensive-looking black suit that made the hospital room seem even more drab and insignificant. His arm was still in a sling, but he looked every bit the powerful man he was. "No more of your charming bedside manner. I'm sure you'll survive," she said, her tone light, belying the knot in her stomach. He stepped closer, invading her personal space. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. "Ilara," he said, his voice low and serious. "Have dinner with me." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of intent. Her heart hammered against her ribs. All her instincts screamed, "No!" This was a bad idea. A terrible, horrible, no good, very bad idea. "I don't think so, Mr. Kwan." "Why not?" "I don't date patients." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. "I'm not your patient anymore." He was relentless. "We come from different worlds," she said, trying another tack, a more honest one. "Let me worry about that." "This is creepy, you know," she said, her voice gaining a bit of its usual fire. "The way you've been watching me, is it legal? Should I be filing a report?" A slow smile spread across his face, and the sight of it was like a punch to the chest. He was amused by her defiance. "Probably not legal, but I find I don't care." His honesty was as disarming as it was alarming. "One dinner, that's all I'm asking." She should have said no. Every rational part of her brain was flashing warning signs, but there was an irrational part, a part that was tired of being sensible and safe, a part that was intrigued by the lonely king in his castle that whispered, "What if?" "Fine," she heard herself say, the word escaping before she could stop it. "One dinner." Victory flared in his eyes, a hot, possessive gleam that made her second-guess her decision immediately. "Tomorrow night. I'll have a car pick you up at 7. "No," she said, grabbing back a sliver of control. "No cars, no fancy restaurants. There's a diner near my apartment, the Blue Plate, 8 o'clock. If you want dinner, you meet me there." He stared at her for a long moment, and she thought he would refuse. A man like him didn't go to diners. But then he nodded slowly. "The Blue Plate, 8 o'clock." He left without another word, Min-jun trailing in his wake like a loyal shadow. Ilara leaned against the doorframe, her legs suddenly feeling weak. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty, sterile room. Jae-hwan had never been to a diner. The concept was foreign, something he'd only seen in old American movies. When he walked into the Blue Plate at 8 o'clock the next evening, he felt more out of place than he had in a room full of Russian mobsters. The air was thick with the smell of fried onions and coffee. The floor was checkered linoleum. The booths were cracked red vinyl. It was loud, chaotic, and alive. He saw her in a booth by the window. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair down, falling in soft curls around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, a vibrant flower blooming in the midst of the organized chaos. She was also looking at him with an expression of profound disbelief. He realized he was still flanked by two of his men, who had insisted on following him inside. He turned to them. "Wait in the car," he ordered, his voice low. They vanished instantly. He slid into the booth opposite her. He had forgone his usual suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, an attempt to appear casual that he now realized was a spectacular failure. He still looked like he had taken a wrong turn on his way to an auction. "You came?" she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I said I would." He picked up the plastic-coated menu, studying it as if it were a complex legal document. "What does one eat at a diner?" Alara let out a small laugh, and the sound eased the tension in his shoulders. "You order a burger and fries, and you try not to look like you're analyzing a hostile takeover." His self-deprecating humor, dry and rarely used, surfaced. "My apologies. Old habits." The dinner was a revelation. For him, it was a glimpse into a world of normalcy he had never known. He listened, truly listened, as she talked about her life. She spoke of her frustrations with the healthcare system, her love for her chaotic family, her fierce loyalty to her friends. She spoke of her dream, the clinic, and as she did, her face lit up with a passion that he found utterly mesmerizing. She wasn't just a beautiful woman, she was a woman with purpose, with a fire in her soul that his gilded, empty world could never extinguish. For Ilara, the dinner was a confusing, dizzying experience. The imposing, dangerous man from the hospital was gone. In his place was Jay, a man who listened intently, who asked thoughtful questions, who had a surprisingly dry wit. He spoke little of himself, deflecting her questions with practiced ease, but she saw glimpses of the man behind the armor. She saw the loneliness in his eyes when she talked about her family, the flicker of something soft and vulnerable when he smiled. "So, what's your dream, Mr. Kwan?" she asked, pushing a stray fry around her plate. "Jay," he corrected her gently. "My dream." He considered the question for a long moment. No one had ever asked him that. His life was not about dreams. It was about duty, legacy, and survival. "I don't have one." The admission was stark, and it hung in the air between them. "Everyone has a dream," she insisted softly. He looked at her, his dark eyes holding hers, and the intensity was back, but this time it wasn't threatening. It was raw, honest. "I do now," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The noise of the diner faded away. There was only him and the weight of his unspoken words. This was more dangerous than any gun. This feeling, this terrifying, exhilarating pull towards him. They walked out of the diner into the cool night air. The street was quiet, the city lights painting the sky a hazy orange. "I had a good time," she admitted, the words feeling inadequate. "So did I." He stood before her, the streetlights carving shadows and highlights onto his face. He didn't try to touch her. He just watched her, his gaze possessive and yet achingly tender. "Another dinner?" She should have said no, but she couldn't. "Okay," she whispered. The weeks that followed were a blur of secret dates and stolen moments. They existed in a bubble, a fragile world built in the spaces between their two realities. He took her to a small, unknown jazz club downtown where they sat in a dark corner and listened to the mournful cry of a saxophone. She took him for a walk through the botanical gardens, where he looked at the flowers with the bewildered expression of a man seeing color for the first time. He never pushed, never demanded. He was patient, gentle, attentive. He learned that she liked her coffee black, that she loved old black and white movies, that she had a sarcastic comment for every occasion. He was unraveling the layers of her defenses, one by one, and she was getting glimpses of him. He told her about growing up in Seoul, about the immense pressure of his family's expectations. He spoke of his mother, who had died when he was young, with a quiet, profound sadness. He never spoke of what his family did, and a part of Alara knew she should press the issue, but another, more cowardly part, didn't want to know. Not yet. She wanted to live in the bubble for just a little longer. One night, he walked her back to her apartment. The streets were slick with rain, the air smelling of wet pavement and exhaust fumes. They stopped under the dim light of her building's awning. "I don't want this night to end," he said, his voice a low murmur. "All nights have to end," she replied softly. "Not this one." He finally closed the small space between them, framing her face with his hands. His palms were warm against her cool skin. His thumbs gently stroked her cheekbones. His eyes searched hers, full of a question he didn't dare ask. And Alara, who had been fighting this for weeks, finally surrendered. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined. It wasn't hard or demanding. It was soft, searching, and full of a desperate, pent-up longing. It was the taste of expensive cologne and diner coffee, of loneliness and hope. It was a confession. It was a promise. It was the end of the beginning. In that moment, pressed against him in the rainy city night, Alara Vance forgot to be wary. She forgot about their different worlds, about the danger that clung to him like a shadow. She only knew that this man, this impossible, intense, and surprisingly gentle man, felt like coming home. The bubble, however, was always destined to burst. Their idyllic period of quiet dates and stolen kisses was a temporary ceasefire in a war Alara didn't fully understand. The first sign of encroachment came in the form of a phone call. They were in her small, cluttered apartment, attempting to cook dinner together. Jay, looking completely out of place in her tiny kitchen, was meticulously chopping vegetables with a startling degree of precision while Alara tried to decipher a recipe. His phone, a sleek, forbiddingly simple black device, vibrated on the counter. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted. The soft, relaxed lines of his face hardened into a familiar mask of command. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by ice. "Excuse me," he said, his voice clipped. He walked into her bedroom, closing the door behind him. Alara stood frozen, a wooden spoon dripping tomato sauce onto the floor. She could hear the low, sharp cadence of his voice, speaking in rapid-fire Korean. The language was foreign to her, but the tone was universal. It was the sound of power, of anger, of orders being given and consequences being threatened. The gentle man who had been laughing at her terrible cooking skills moments before was gone. In his place was the kingpin, the head of the Kwan family, the man from room 1201. When he emerged a few minutes later, the mask was still in place. "I have to go," he said. There was no apology, just a flat statement of fact. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice small. He looked at her, and for a second she saw a flicker of regret, of conflict in his dark eyes. "It's business." He leaned in and gave her a quick, hard kiss that tasted of ash. "I'll call you." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the kitchen with the smell of burning garlic and the chilling echo of his phone call. The bubble had been pricked. For Jay, the intrusion was infuriating. The call had been from his father, Chairman Kwan, a man whose presence was a constant oppressive weight. The chairman ruled the family syndicate with an iron fist from his estate in Seoul, and he did not approve of his son's distraction. "You are getting soft, Jae-hwan." His father's voice had crackled over the secure line, cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "This woman, this foreigner, she is making you forget your duty. The family has enemies. The triads are testing our port operations. The Bratva are making moves on our territory. And you are playing house with a nurse?" "I am handling it," Jay had replied, his own voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Are you?" the chairman had sneered. "Or are you letting your judgment be clouded? Remember who you are. Remember what is at stake. An heir has no room for personal sentiment. Such things are a weakness, and weakness, it gets people hurt." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. It wasn't a threat against Jay. It was a threat against Alara. The thought sent a cold, terrifying rage through him. He had built a wall of steel and silence around his life to protect those he cared about, but by letting Alara in, he had painted a target on her back. He had been a fool to think he could keep his two worlds separate. They were on a collision course, and the impact would be devastating. He knew then what he had to do. He couldn't keep lying to her, not even by omission. The half-truths and deflections were an insult to her intelligence and a danger to her life. She deserved the whole, ugly truth, and he had to be the one to give it to her. He owed her that much. He owed her everything. He called her the next day. "Meet me tonight," he said, his voice grave. "My apartment. We need to talk." Alara's heart sank. The tone of his voice confirmed her fears. This was it. The end of the bubble. She agreed, a sense of dread coiling in her stomach. His penthouse was exactly as she had imagined it, sterile, opulent, and impersonal. It was a space designed to impress, not to be lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city, but inside it felt cold and empty. It was a beautiful cage. Jay was standing by the window when she arrived, a silhouette against the glittering skyline. He was back in a perfectly tailored suit, the armor he wore to face the world. He looked like a stranger. "Thank you for coming," he said, turning to face her. His face was pale, his expression grim. You said we needed to talk," she said, wrapping her arms around herself, a subconscious defensive posture. He gestured to a minimalist leather sofa. "Please, sit." She remained standing. "I think I'd rather stand." He gave a short, pained nod. He didn't sit either. He began to pace, a restless energy emanating from him. "What I'm about to tell you, it's not easy to hear, and it's not easy to say. I should have told you from the beginning, but I was a coward." He stopped pacing and faced her directly, his dark eyes boring into hers. "My name is Jae Hwan Kwan. You know that. What you don't know is what that name means." He took a deep breath. "I am not a security consultant. That was a lie. My family. We are not in a normal business. We own shipping companies, real estate, tech firms. Many of them are legitimate, but the foundation of our wealth, the source of our power, it comes from other things, illegal things." Alara's blood ran cold. She stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. "My grandfather started it in Seoul after the war. My father expanded it. It's a syndicate, an organization. Some would call it the Mafia." He said the word without flinching, a flat, dead statement of fact. "And I am not just a part of it. I am its head. The gunshot wound, it wasn't from a consultation. It was from a meeting with a rival faction that disagreed with my terms." The room was silent. The only sound was the frantic, panicked thumping of Alara's own heart. He was a gangster, a mob boss. The man she had kissed, the man she had allowed herself to fall for, was part of a world of violence and crime she only knew from movies. A world that was the antithesis of everything she was, everything she believed in. She was a healer. Her entire life was dedicated to mending what was broken, to saving lives. He was part of a machine that broke things, that took lives. "You lied to me," she whispered, the words trembling. It was all she could manage. The betrayal was a physical pain, a sharp, twisting knife in her gut. "Yes," he said, his voice raw with self-loathing. "I did, because I wanted you to see me, the man I am with you, not the man I was raised to be. When I met you, Alara, it was the first time I felt anything. In years. You are everything my world is not. You are good and kind, and you build things. I destroy them. I was selfish. I wanted to keep you in my life, even for a little while, and I knew the truth would scare you away." Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and angry. "Scare me away? Jay, this isn't about being scared. This is about what's right. Everything we've done, every conversation, every kiss. Was it all a lie?" "No." He took a step towards her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Nothing with you was a lie. The way I feel about you is the only real thing in my entire life." He looked desperate, his composure cracking, showing her the terrified man beneath the kingpin's armor. "I love you, Alara." The words, which she had secretly longed to hear, now felt like a curse. They landed with the force of a blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Love? How could this be love? This dark, twisted, impossible thing. "Don't," she choked out, taking a step back. "Don't say that." "It's the truth." She shook her head, the tears finally spilling over, tracing hot tracks down her cheeks. "I can't. I can't be with a man who does what you do. I'm a nurse, Jay. I hold people's hands while they're dying. I don't want to be with the man who might have been the reason they're dying in the first place." The color drained from his face. Her words had hit their mark, a precise and devastating strike. He looked as if she had physically wounded him. "This is my life," he said, his voice hollow. "It's not a choice. It's an inheritance. A duty." "Then it's a duty I can't be a part of," she said, her voice breaking. She felt her heart shattering into a million pieces. The man she loved and the man he was were two different people, and she couldn't reconcile them. She couldn't live with the cognitive dissonance, the moral compromise. It would destroy her. She turned and walked towards the door, each step feeling like she was wading through wet cement. "Alara, please!" he called after her, his voice thick with a pain that mirrored her own. "Don't go." She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she saw the agony on his face, she knew her resolve would crumble. She fumbled with the handle, her hands shaking, and pulled the door open. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty, opulent hallway. "I can't." She fled, leaving him alone in his beautiful, empty cage, the city lights glittering below like a galaxy of fallen stars, each one a testament to a world she could never be a part of. The hours after she left were a blur of numb, frantic activity. Alara stumbled back to her apartment, the city streets a smear of neon and rain through her tear-filled eyes. Chloe was there, taking one look at her face and enveloping her in a fierce, protective hug. "He told you, didn't he?" Chloe asked softly. Alara could only nod, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. She explained everything in broken whispers, the syndicate, the lies, the violence, the impossible choice. Chloe listened, her expression growing harder with every word. "You did the right thing," Chloe said firmly, stroking her hair. "You have to get away from him, for your own safety, for your own soul." Alara knew she was right. Staying with Jay wasn't just a moral compromise, it was a danger. His father's veiled threat, which Jay had confessed during his painful admission, echoed in her mind. Weakness. It gets people hurt. She was his weakness. The decision was agonizing but clear. She had to disappear. She spent the night packing a small bag, her movements robotic. She wrote the note, the 4 simple words feeling like a betrayal of her own heart. "I can't do this." It was the truth, but it was an incomplete truth. The full truth was, "I can't do this, but I love you, and leaving you is ripping me apart." She couldn't write that. She couldn't give him that hope. In the pre-dawn gloom, Chloe drove her to Jay's building. She wouldn't let Alara go alone. While Chloe waited in the car, her hand hovering over her phone, ready to call 911, Alara rode the silent private elevator up to the penthouse. The hallway was empty, unnaturally quiet. She slipped the folded piece of paper under his door. It felt like leaving a piece of her own heart on his cold marble floor. Then she turned and ran. This was how Jae Hwan Kwan found himself standing in his living room, the sun rising over his city, holding her final words. The stillness that had seized him was the stillness of utter devastation. The world had gone silent, the vibrant colors she had brought into his life bleeding out into a familiar, monotonous gray. He sank onto the sofa where she had refused to sit, the note clutched in his hand. He didn't rage. He didn't break things. The pain was too deep for that, a cold, heavy anchor in his chest. He had known this was a possibility. He had prepared for it. But the reality of it, the finality of her absence, was 1,000 times worse than he had ever imagined. He had lost her, the only good, real thing in his life. And it was his own fault. His world had poisoned her, and she had done the only sensible thing. She had cut out the infection. In the days that followed, Jay became a ghost. He moved through his life with a chilling robotic efficiency. He was more ruthless in his business dealings, more merciless with his enemies. He projected an aura of cold, untouchable power, but it was a brittle facade. Min-jun, who had known him since they were boys, saw the truth. He saw the hollowness in his boss's eyes, the way he would sometimes stare at nothing, his expression lost and broken. He saw the untouched meals, the sleepless nights. Jay had his men search for her, a frantic, desperate command given in the first few hours, but he called it off almost immediately. What was he going to do? Drag her back? Force her to be with him? That would make him the monster she feared he was. Loving her meant letting her go. It was the cruelest irony of his life. Meanwhile, Ilara's world had also turned to gray. She had taken a leave of absence from the hospital and was staying with her mother in a quiet, suffocating suburb an hour from the city. Her mother, who had never liked the sound of Jay, was full of "I told you so's" and well-meaning but painful advice. "You're better off, baby," her mother would say, patting her hand. "A man like that is nothing but trouble." Ilara would just nod, her throat too tight to speak. Was she better off? She was safe, yes. Her principles were intact, but she was miserable. Every day was a monotonous stretch of empty hours. She missed his dry humor. She missed the intensity of his gaze. She missed the surprising gentleness of his touch. She missed the man she had fallen in love with, and she couldn't separate him from the kingpin he was forced to be. The ache of his absence was a constant companion, a dull, persistent pain in her chest. She and Jay lived in a state of parallel misery. He was surrounded by wealth and power, but utterly alone. She was surrounded by the supposed safety of a normal life, but felt hollow and incomplete. They were two halves of a whole, separated by a chasm of blood and duty. One evening, months after she had left, Ilara was helping her mother in the garden. The work was mindless, pulling weeds from the soft earth. Her mother was talking about a nice young man from their church, a dentist. "He's very respectable, Ilara. You should let me introduce you." Ilara stood up, wiping dirt from her hands. "I'm not interested, Mom." "It's been months. You can't mourn that man forever. He was bad for you." "You don't understand," Ilara said, her voice cracking. "There was good in him. I saw it." "Good men don't have people shot," her mother retorted sharply. The words hit Ilara like a slap. She knew her mother was right on the surface, but it was more complicated than that. She was haunted by the memory of Jay's face when he'd told her he loved her, the raw desperation in his eyes. He had been trapped just as she was, trapped by a life he hadn't chosen. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The safety she had run to felt like a prison of its own, a quiet beige prison of a life she didn't want. She had chosen her principles over her heart, and she was beginning to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Was a life without love, a life without him, truly the better choice? The question echoed in the lonely silence of her room, and she had no answer. The turning point for Jae Hwan came during a meeting with his father. Chairman Kwan had flown in from Seoul, his arrival casting a pall over the entire organization. He had summoned Jae to a sterile boardroom in one of their downtown office buildings. The chairman was a small, wiry man with eyes like chips of obsidian. He looked at his son, at the cold, hard shell he had built around himself, and he approved. "Good," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "The woman is gone. You are focused again. This is how it should be." Jay said nothing, his hands steepled in front of him on the polished table. "Now," the chairman continued, We must deal with the aftermath of your distraction. The Antonov family thinks you have gone soft. We must make an example of them. A decisive, brutal example. He outlined a plan that was bloody, violent, and designed to spread fear. It was the old way, the way of his father, and his father before him. As he listened, something inside Jae-hwan finally snapped. He looked at his father, at this man who personified the darkness that had cost him everything, and he saw his own future, a future of endless violence, of empty power, of a throne built on fear and death, a future without Ilara, a future without light, and he refused. No, Jay said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a bomb. The chairman stared at him. What did you say? I said no, Jay repeated, his voice gaining strength. He stood up, towering over his father. There will be no example. There will be no more of this. The world is changing. Our way of doing business is a relic. It is a cancer. Have you lost your mind? His father hissed, his face contorting in a mask of rage. This is our legacy, our power. This legacy cost me the only thing I have ever valued, Jay said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. This power is a prison. I am done with it. He saw Ilara's face in his mind, her tear-streaked cheeks, the horror in her eyes. I can't be with a man who does what you do. He had a choice. He had always had a choice, but he had been too blind, too buried in duty, to see it. He couldn't ask her to change for his world, so he would change his world for her. I am taking the Kwan family legitimate, Jay announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Completely. I am selling off the ports. I am dissolving the enforcement divisions. I am cutting ties with our associates. Every asset will be cleaned, reinvested. It will take years. It will be war. But when it is done, the Kwan name will be clean. His father looked at him as if he were a traitor. You will destroy us. Our enemies will tear us apart. You are a fool, a weak, sentimental fool. No, Jay said, a cold, hard certainty settling in his soul. I am free. He walked out of the room, leaving his father sputtering in impotent rage. For the first time, Jay was not the heir. He was the king, and he was dismantling his own kingdom. The next 6 months were the most dangerous of his life. His declaration sent shockwaves through the underworld. His own capos, men loyal to the old ways, plotted against him. His rivals, smelling blood in the water, tested him at every turn. There were attempts on his life, betrayals, and brutal negotiations. But Jay was methodical, relentless, and utterly single-minded. He had a purpose now, a reason beyond simple survival. He was fighting for a future with her. He moved with surgical precision, guided by Min-jun, whose loyalty never wavered. He sold off the illicit parts of his empire piece by piece, taking massive financial losses but gaining something far more valuable. He funneled the money into a new, legitimate corporation, with a charitable foundation as its centerpiece. One rainy afternoon, a full year after she had left, Ilara was working a shift at the small, underfunded community clinic she had started volunteering at. She had moved back to the city a few months prior, unable to bear the suffocating quiet of the suburbs any longer. She was surviving, but not thriving. The ache for Jay was a permanent part of her now. A sleek black car, one she recognized with a painful jolt, pulled up outside. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it wasn't Jay who got out, it was Min-jun. He walked into the clinic, looking as out of place as Jay had in the diner. He approached her desk, his expression unreadable. "Miss Vance?" he said, his voice a low rumble. He placed a thick file on the counter in front of her. "Mr. Kwan asked me to deliver this to you." Her hands trembled as she reached for it. "What is it?" "Proof," Min-jun said simply. He gave her a short, almost respectful bow, and then left as quietly as he had arrived. Ilara opened the file. It was filled with legal documents, financial statements, and news clippings. Sale agreements for shipping terminals known to be hubs of illegal trade, charters for new, legitimate tech and real estate ventures, articles detailing the restructuring of the Quan Empire, noting the immense financial losses in the shift towards legitimate enterprise. And at the very back, there was a prospectus for a new charitable organization, the EV Foundation. Its mission statement was to provide funding for community healthcare initiatives in underserved neighborhoods. Her initials, E.V. Ilara Vance. The breath left her body in a rush. He had done it. He had actually done it. He had torn down his entire world, piece by bloody piece. For her, the sheer scale of the gesture, the sacrifice, the risk, it was overwhelming. The tears she had held back for a year finally came, not of sadness, but of a powerful, earth-shattering love. She knew what she had to do. That night she took a taxi to his new headquarters, a gleaming glass tower that represented his new, legitimate world. She didn't know if he would see her. She didn't know what she would say. She only knew she had to be there. She found him not in a penthouse, but in a simple, functional office on one of the upper floors. He was standing by the window, looking out at the rain-streaked city, just as he had been that terrible night a year ago. But this time he wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. The sling was long gone, but he looked tired, and there were new lines of stress around his eyes. He turned as if sensing her presence, and his eyes widened in shock. "Ilara," he breathed, her name a prayer. She walked towards him, her heart in her throat. She stopped a few feet away, clutching the file to her chest. "I got your message." He looked thinner, worn down, but his eyes held a light she had never seen before, a light of hope. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm trying not to be. For you." "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Jay, I know." The space between them crackled with a year of unspoken words, of shared misery, of desperate, unyielding love. He didn't move towards her. He was giving her the choice, the control he had never given her before. And she chose him. She closed the distance in 2 quick steps, dropping the file on the floor. She threw her arms around his neck, and he finally moved, his own arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him as if he could absorb her into himself. He buried his face in her hair, his body shuddering with a year of repressed grief and longing. "I'm so sorry," he murmured into her curls. "For everything." "Shh," she whispered, pulling back just enough to look at him. "It's over." She looked into his eyes, and she no longer saw a kingpin. She saw her Jay, the man who listened, the man who dreamed of her, the man who had changed his world for her. She raised a hand to his face, her thumb tracing the faint scar over his eyebrow. Then she leaned in and kissed him. It was a kiss of reunion, of forgiveness, of a future reclaimed from the ashes of the past. It was desperate and passionate, a sealing of a promise made a lifetime ago in a hospital room. It was the taste of rain and redemption. It was the end of their separation and the true beginning of their future. In his arms, surrounded by the city that was now theirs to build a new life in, Ilara Vance was finally, completely home. 2 years later, the grand opening of the Ilara Vance Community Clinic was a loud, joyous affair. The small building, once a derelict storefront, was now a bright, clean, and welcoming space, filled with brand new equipment and the buzz of the neighborhood it was built to serve. Ilara, dressed in a simple blue dress, moved through the crowd, her face glowing with a happiness so profound it seemed to radiate from her. Jae Hwan Kwan stood near the back, watching her. He wore a quiet smile, looking more at ease in a simple dark suit than he ever had before. The transition of his business was an ongoing battle, but the war was largely won. The Kwan name was now associated with philanthropy and innovation, not fear. The scars of his past remained, both on his body and his soul, but they no longer defined him. Love had redefined him. Ilara caught his eye from across the room, and her smile widened. She excused herself from a conversation with the mayor and made her way to him. "You're hiding," she teased, looping her arm through his. "I'm observing," he corrected, his eyes twinkling. "This is your day, your dream." "Our dream," she said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "None of this would be possible without you." He looked down at her, his expression full of a deep, quiet love that still made her heart skip a beat. "And none of me would be possible without you." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "You saved me, Alara." She squeezed his arm, her heart full. They had saved each other. He had given her the security to build her dream, and she had given him a reason to become the man he was always meant to be. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real, forged in fire and doubt, and built on the radical, redemptive power of a second chance. As the sun set outside, casting a warm glow into the clinic, they stood together. Two worlds collided and remade into one, finally at peace. This story teaches us that love is not merely an emotion, but a powerful catalyst for change. It explores the idea that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to fight for it, and that true strength lies not in power or control, but in the vulnerability and sacrifice required to become worthy of the love you wish to receive. It reminds us that even when worlds collide, a new one can be built from the wreckage, founded on courage, forgiveness, and hope. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you were moved by Jay and Alara's journey, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more dramatic stories, and share it with someone who believes in the power of love to overcome any obstacle. Now, we want to hear from you. What did you think of Alara's decision to leave Jay after his confession? Was she right to prioritize her principles, or should she have stayed and fought for him then? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And for our next story, who would you like to see find their own unlikely romance? Should it be A. Min-jun, the loyal second-in-command, who finds himself protecting a feisty investigative reporter trying to expose his past? B. Chloe, the supportive best friend, who clashes with a stoic, by-the-book detective investigating a case that brings her too close to the criminal underworld? Vote in the comments! We can't wait to read your opinions.